Steve Grumbine is the founder and CEO of the nonprofits Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, and host of the podcast Macro and Cheese. He's also a leading activist and evangelist for modern monetary theory, so he's the guy we want to talk to. Welcome back, Steve. Good to have you.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
So much, man. I'm so sorry about the last time.
No.
Right.
Things happen. I'm glad you could join us. So let's start with today's news about inflation. And this is the thing that I was most excited to ask you about. Inflation has never been a big deal to me. I don't know why.
It became a big deal when it was like 9%.
But I would be far more worried about unemployment than inflation.
Oh, yes.
And the Fed's goal is 2%. Inflation's 3.3, up a little bit from 3. What's so bad about 3% inflation, Steve? That's a heck of a lot better than what the Eurozone's going through right now.
Inflation is just a number, right? The issue is it tells you something. It doesn't tell you everything.
Right.
And the question becomes, what's going on the other side of that? Are people's wages keeping up with inflation? Because remember, anytime you see inflation, that means somebody else is getting more money. Somebody else is spending more money. It's always an issue of somebody spending, somebody earning. So, or not even necessarily earning, just getting, in some cases. And so the question is that are wages keeping up? I mean, let's be fair. On paper, looks like employment is really good.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like, right?
Mm-hmm.
It looks like a lot of people have a lot of jobs and so forth. But what it's not telling is that gap between my pay and what it costs to live. And so having a bunch of jobs, having a bunch of people employed, it sounds great, but it doesn't really tell the full story. And I agree 100% with you, John, on this one. Unemployment is the real key here. But see, what's the problem is that they're getting that kind of false positive. Unemployment's up. Everything's great, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
The problem is that delta between inflation and our paychecks. And, one of the things that I don't think people really talk enough about is the debts that we've incurred both through the pandemic for living differently, like life changed. So we had to do things differently. And, with people not having work and some people just getting those checks coming in from the government that weren't all that great. In the end, you're looking at people who are now suddenly having to pay the piper.
Mm-hmm.
So you got a lot of debt that's coming back into play. Mm-hmm. And in exactly 1 month and a day, we're going to be having student loans kicked back in.
Oh, that's
so
exactly
I think
right.
that there's an incredible amount of untold story with that 3.3%. And even looking at the wonderful, employment numbers that they wave at you, is the pay commensurate with the cost of living? And I say to that answer is no, I don't believe it is.
Mm-hmm. This 3.3% number, in my mind, just guarantees that the Fed is going to try to raise interest rates again at its next meeting. You and I talked about this the last time you were on the show, Steve. Raising rates as much as they have deliberately causes human misery. If you remember, that was sort of the point of our conversation, was there's a human cost to these kinds of policies. So why hurt so many people, pushing them out of work, putting home ownership out of reach for so many Americans for another 1 percentage point reduction in inflation? Is it really worth it?
Well, let's go back and examine what actually rate increases do. I've said this before, but this is a new show, so we'll say it again. When you raise rates, you're giving more money to people who already have money. So these rates go to all those bondholders, all those investors, and they already have money. That's why they're able to invest. So this money, there's money, new money coming into the economy through the interest income channel. This is what is keeping the economy going, but is the epitome of trickle down.
Yeah.
There is no greater, more perverse view of this than trickle down.
Yeah.
They're expecting by pumping money through that interest income that the rich will spend, the people with money will spend, and it will just suddenly make it through. And to some degree, That's true. That's why the macro level looks good. It's that when you start carving it up through stratifying various groups and seeing who has been impacted most, you start to realize the people at the bottom are still struggling. They're struggling even harder because it costs more money to survive. I went to not that this is a real great indicator of all things, but going to the pump the other day, it's back to near $4 a gallon.
Yeah, it is. I paid $3.99 yesterday.
Exactly. That right there is a key factor. Remember, gas, petroleum products in general are in absolutely everything, from making glass to making plastic to making lubricants to every single vehicle in the world, to you name it. And so this is a key cause for a lot of that inflation, just on the more organic side. But you got to realize we still haven't kicked gouging, right? There's still a lot. I mean, Isabella Weber, who I spoke about last time, did a great study. If you check her out on Twitter or X or whatever they call it these days, she's got an incredible amount of information pointing to the causes of this kind of greedflation that's been going on out there. It's kind of profit maximization. So, inflation in and of itself is not a big deal as long as the people's incomes are keeping up and employment isn't, but the Fed, what do? These guys are living in dinosaur era.
Yeah, they are.
Thinking that they can control everything with this blunt force instrument that is indiscriminate. It just hurts. And, for those who have stocks and bonds and so forth and investments and pensions, I mean, this helps, quite frankly. I mean, I'm sure that if you talk to people that have their average 401k, they're saying, oh, my goodness, I'm watching it go up, up, up.
Yes.
But for the average person trying to just pay their electric bill, not so much.
I was telling my sister this morning that one of my earliest memories was my dad coming home from work one day. I was 4, so it would have been 1968. And he was so happy. He told my mom he had gotten a raise. And I specifically remember my mom looking at the letter and saying, just think, honey, if you could just make $7,000, we'd be on Easy Street. Now, I knew you were going to be on the show today, so I went into one of those calculators, those inflation calculators. $7,000 in 1968 is $64,538 today. Well, for an elementary school principal, no elementary school principal is making $64,500. They're making double that. So, in my view, inflation is not the enemy there. Unemployment is the enemy. Would I rather make $120,000 or $130,000 and pay more in daily life for gas, for food, whatever? Or would I rather run the risk of unemployment and hope to keep inflation down? I'd be just scared to death of unemployment.
Yeah, I mean, just think about this. I mean, I don't think we think of it in this vein. We've always talked about it from a healthcare perspective.
Yeah.
But if you consider the movie Breaking Bad and you consider, Heisenberg,
right.
He didn't start off Heisenberg, did he?
No, he sure didn't.
I mean, he started off as a school teacher,
high school chemistry teacher. Yeah.
That's right. And this was a guy who simply couldn't make ends meet based on the pay that he was receiving. He was terrified that he would be bringing a daughter into this world with nothing to leave behind. And most of us, the best we've got is some old credit card statements and maybe some ragged clothes and maybe a couple things that, were special to us that we can pass on.
Yeah.
We're not dealing in a time where generational wealth is passed on. So if you think about one of the other concerns about inflation, I mean, you're literally stripping away your ability to take care of your next generation. Things that we often just consider just natural, that, when I get older, I'm saving for you kids when you go up, blah, blah, blah. These things just don't happen. They happen for some people. Let me be clear. They happen for some people. I know people that are paying their kids' school, no problem. There's a lot of us out there that just don't have it quite like that.
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
That's becoming more and more.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you about Mitch McConnell. It appears that he's having some sort of seizure or episode or something. The Republicans keep raising questions about Joe Biden's fitness for the job. And to tell you the truth, I think those questions are legitimate. But what about Mitch McConnell's fitness? Is it time for Republican Senate leadership change? I mean, technically, there's not even going to be a vote on a Senate leadership change until after the November 2024 election. Although Senate rules say that if 5 senators ask for a conference on a leadership change, they have to hold such a conference. Do you think that Mitch McConnell can make it until the end of his term in 2026? Part of the Republican calculation here has to be that Andy Beshear, who's the governor of Kentucky and is a Democrat, would nominate McConnell's replacement were he to vacate the seat, and that replacement would be a Democrat, at least for 2 years. What do you think the calculation is here?
I think, honestly, that the Republicans could do an awful lot to hide McConnell, quite frankly. I mean, think about how long Feinstein stayed on the lam.
And that was my next question. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got the what is that? Octogenarians or
octogenarians? Yeah, yeah.
I mean, these folks they're up there, and I'm not an ageist, and I'm not going to sit there and say, because one of my most important mentors is in her 70s. Mm-hmm. This is not an indictment in any way. However, it's quite clear that he's not up to the task. His health isn't. I have no love for Mitch McConnell.
No, nor do I.
But that said, just assessing it, kind of just cold and scientific here, the guy's got a health problem. There's clearly a health issue going on here.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, I think there should be some sort of opportunity there to either stash him away and keep him out of the limelight, like they did with Joe Biden during the campaign, how they hid him in the basement and sort of brought him out at the end and let him slur his way through.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I mean, there's got to be a way to hide him away, and I don't think that they're going to jeopardize putting a Democrat in there, given the fact that there's so few chances of them maintaining this kind of stranglehold. These things are very cyclical. They flip around and so forth. So my suspicion is they'll find a way to make him last to the end. I don't know what that'll be, but they'll find a way.
Prop him up. The New York Attorney General is accusing Donald Trump of inflating his wealth by some $2 billion. She must not have been paying attention before now. A lot of people have long suspected and have said publicly that Donald Trump was doing exactly that and that he probably wasn't even a billionaire. Others have long asked why, if he has so much money, he has to hold fundraisers to pay his legal bills, which he doesn't pay anyway. Mm-hmm. And indeed, his super PAC is paying his attorneys rather than spending the money raised on advertising for the presidential campaign. So how much of a problem might these allegations be against Trump? On the surface of things, he seems to have more important things to worry about, but could this case dog him too?
Well, the other question also is, how much of a problem is this going to pose to every other wealthy person in New York who we all know inflate their wealth to get good loans, to get good rates on loans, to, you know what I mean?
And in some cases, they just make it up. Remember the story about he was the Secretary of Commerce, I forget his name now, the old man who kept falling asleep at the cabinet meetings? Wilbur Ross. Wilbur Ross. Forbes would call him and say, hey, how much you worth this year? How much you worth this year? Every year they'd call him. And every year he would add, 25% onto what he told them the previous year.
Are all these guys going to be quaking in their boots? Because if they're going after Donald Trump for it, they sure as hell are going to go after everybody else, right?
And then they're not going to get that, table at Danielle.
Yeah. I'm going to throw something at you. It'll seem somewhat unrelated, but I assure you I'll bring it home. Bernie Madoff, was a piker in the world of, Ponzi schemes and jilting their investors. Just a piker. He wasn't even a big player in the grand scheme of it.
Right.
The big problems were way bigger than Bernie Madoff. But Bernie Madoff took the fall.
Yes.
He took the fall. He was the poster child to say, see, we do take these things quite seriously. And so Bernie took the fall. And when's the last time you saw another guy like Bernie Madoff go down for the count? You haven't, right? Yep. Bernie took it for them all. And now everybody was sated and just went off, after a good meal and went to bed, took a nap. That's what's happening here, I think. I think, quite frankly, Donald Trump, this is the ultimate Democrat. Let me see if we can use this system to win our politics because our candidates are terrible. How else can we do this? Quite frankly, anything they throw at Donald Trump at this point in time is going to invigorate his loyal and is going to absolutely invigorate his haters. And for those of us on the outside of that just look on and eat their popcorn, I think if anything, the Trump gang will be the fall guys for an awful lot of other people that are really, really bad actors that will live to fight another day after Donald Trump takes it on the chin in whatever fashion that looks like in the end. I think he's Bernie Madoff.
Yeah, I think you're right. Hey, the United Auto Workers Union is set to strike on September 14th. This would be the biggest auto industry strike that we have seen in decades. And the union is utterly unified. I mentioned a few minutes ago, of the union's 150,000 members, 97% voted to strike. So tell us about the issues in this fight. What is it that's most important for the union to win?
See, at this point in time, I think unions in general are flexing their muscles. I think that labor as a whole is trying to say, hey, we see your profits. We see what you guys are reaping in. We want a piece of that action. We've been left behind. Our wages have not gone up. Our health care packages stink. I think this is in general happening across, because just yesterday, American Airlines flight attendant union, I think it's 27,000 members, voted in favor of, gave a favorable yes vote for a strike. They're not going out on strike yet, but they have okayed a strike. So you've got major action happening within unions because people are starting to realize that the only way through this political process, I think at a grander level, is through the unions. I really believe that what you're seeing now is, I don't know whether it'll take hold. I don't know whether this is the spark that starts the fire, but I do believe you're watching these unions in general reacting to the political culture and reacting to the inflation and reacting to the suppressed wages. And they're doing the fight. I think they're all starting to reawaken. Now, I don't know if they've got enough power to make a dent, but this is a big one. The auto workers in general is a huge one. Huge.
And you raise an important point here. The question, one of the important questions is going to be, is the union powerful enough to be able to hold out in a long-lasting strike? Right now, they have incredible unity. So on the surface of things, it seems that the automakers are going to want to make some concessions and get everybody back to work. At the same time, maybe these corporate leaders are calculating that if they can hold out, they can start peeling workers away and try to either break or to weaken the unions. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely correct. Look, when these political figures in our government have these meetings, they don't meet with the union leaders so much. They meet with the industry leaders. Yes. And they know the plans that are being acted upon by our government are not in the favor of labor. They are in the favor of capital 100% of the time. And, I'm shocked, if you will, to see that Biden hasn't stepped in or done something. I mean, I expect if the airline workers actually do go on strike, I could imagine Biden invoking the same thing he did with, the railway workers. Same thing applies to them as well. But you notice that the government never, ever, ever steps in on behalf of labor. So these laws, the conditions that we see, interest rates, all this stuff plays into a larger picture that all these guys are very, very involved with. They're not ignorant. They didn't not know that these hikes would come. They did not know the conditions were such that they wouldn't bring about austere conditions, that people in general wouldn't be feeling the pain. They knew this was coming. So my guess is that with a combination of government, de facto supporting capital here, supporting the management, supporting the corporate structure, they do probably think at some level, hey, we can wait this out. But if you look, there was I think it was UPS thwarted a strike with pretty much wasn't really that great a deal, right? It really wasn't. But who came? The management came quickly and said, here, take this. And they were, the union leaders who are deeply in bed with these business leaders. It's not like these union leaders, most of them, I shouldn't say all, most of them are in bed with management. They've forgotten they represent labor. And so they say, this is a great deal. We're going to take it. And then they sell this lie to their workers.
Yes. My
guess is that this is what the management is expecting and hoping and playing on. They've got aces throughout the system. They have people that are their patsies that know that they want to keep their 5-star dinners. They want to keep their golf trips. They want to keep all the little perks that come with being, a union leader and tied to the corporate structure. So I suspect that they do expect that they will be able to outweigh these folks.
Steve,
count on scabs, count on people slipping away because the cost of living has exceeded their income. And now that they're not receiving an income because they're on strike, wham, there goes the solidarity.
FEMA has been one of the most chronically, perpetually poorly managed entities in the entire federal government. Leadership seems to be consistently bad. It doesn't make any difference who the president is. Congress has little desire to keep it funded and running anyway. The disaster relief fund is going to be broke in a couple of weeks, while Maui and now Florida are in dire need of immediate assistance. Why do we not see bipartisan action on this issue? This seems like a gimme right now. There's no downside to helping Americans who have been victims of a disaster, but that's just not the reality in Congress. Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't think that you're thinking about it through the lens of business. I think you're thinking about it through the lens of common sense.
Yeah.
But the lens here is different, right? The minute that government does something, and it does something well, you're like, well, why don't we keep doing more of this government thing?
Yeah.
It's doing pretty daggone good. I wonder how it would work with healthcare. I wonder how it would work with housing. And so they purposely underfund programs. This is literally not even a conspiracy. This is just the way it is. They purposely underfund these programs because they want to ensure that at any time they can always say the private sector is superior to the public sector. And this is the lie that they self-engineer to ensure capital and capitalism as a working model stays intact.
Yeah.
I mean, Clara Mattei, who I've spoken about previously, she wrote a great book about the capital order, and she described the severe overreaction that occurred in 1917 when the Bolsheviks did their bit in Russia, how capitalists around the world were in absolute terror, and they had to engineer austerity to ensure that capital stayed intact. And so this has always been the game since then, and it hasn't changed, and it won't change until we decide it must change and do something about it other than just talk about it. We got to do.
Man.
But yeah, I think that's your story right there. The minute that they solve the problem in Maui, the minute that they help in Florida, you think about what happened in New Jersey when the floods came through there.
Oh yeah, Hurricane Sandy.
We're talking about we've always underfunded, always underfunded.
Yep. And hope for the best. But as they say in business school, hope is not a strategy. So Steve Grumbine, thanks for joining us. Steve is the founder and CEO of the nonprofits Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, and host of the podcast Macro and Cheese. He's also a leading activist and evangelist for modern monetary theory.